Have you ever loved someone in a place where love was supposed to be silent? If you've ever felt desire collide with faith, or carried a secret that burned your chest every Sunday, this story is for you. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe for more London love stories, and tell me in the comments, do you think love can survive a scandal in a place of worship? Chica never expected trouble to find her in church. She was the soft voice on soprano, neatly dressed, headscarf folded like a quiet prayer. People trusted her with the keys to the vestry, the warm-up piano, the spare hymnals. She arrived early, stacked chairs without being asked, smiled in a way that made everyone feel safe. She was a student nurse during the week, the kind of girl who carried plasters in her pouch and comfort in her voice. If you ask the aunties in the congregation, they would say, "That girl is a blessing." And usually they were right. David did not look like a blessing. He played drums like the rhythm was the one true scripture. Shoulders flexing under a black hoodie, jaw tight, eyes sometimes far away, even when he was right there behind the kid. He was at church because his mother insisted, because his younger sister sang alto and refused to walk in alone, because even for the moody and the complicated, Sunday has a pool. He studied sound engineering in East London and worked nights in a warehouse. People said he had an attitude. Maybe he did. Or maybe the world had been loud in ways that taught him to be louder. They noticed each other the way two notes find harmony by accident. Chica was carrying a box of cables down the back stairs. David was coming up with a cymbal under his arm. The corridor was too narrow. They did that awkward dance of "you go, no you go," and then they laughed. He reached for the box. "Let me," he said. She hesitated. She'd been told not to rely on strangers, but this was no stranger. This was the drummer everyone's aunties said needed prayer. She handed it over anyway. Their fingers touched. Something small sparked. After rehearsal that day, the choir lingered upstairs, comparing harmonies, while the band packed cables below. Chica's phone buzzed with a timetable change at the hospital. She sighed, and the sound carried down the stairwell. David's voice floated up. "You good?" She surprised herself by answering, "Just tired." He laughed softly. Church is the only place that calls work a rest. They started greeting each other in passing. A nod on arrival, a safe on departure. Then jokes slipped in, quiet ones just for them. She told him the altos always came in late. He said the snare was innocent even if it sounded rude. She called him noise. He called her halo. It felt harmless. It felt small. It felt like a corner of the building only they could see. London grew colder. Winter took light from afternoons and breath from mouths waiting at bus stops. Rehearsals stretched to prep for carol service. Last-minute key changes and endless repetition. On a Saturday evening, the pastor's wife handed Chica the basement keys. "Lock up when you're done," she said. "You're the responsible one." Downstairs, the church basement smelled of polish and damp, with old pews stacked like patient giants and boxes labeled Christmas lights and Easter decor. David was fiddling with a broken mic stand. When Chica turned on the side lamp, the light fell like warm rain, leaving the corners in gentle shadow. It didn't look like a holy place. It looked like a room that forgave mess. She sat at the battered keyboard, testing notes. He tapped the kick pedal, muted, checking squeaks. They worked side by side in an easy silence, two people comfortable with the same kind of focus. When she played a chord progression, simple, pretty, he smiled. Play that again. She did. He leaned closer to listen. The notes trembled because her hands did. Don't be shy, he said. Music isn't. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the glow of the lamp. Maybe it was how his voice dropped when he said her name, as if he were taking care of it. She looked up and found him already looking. For a long second, they didn't move. Then she laughed, small and nervous, and turned back to the keys. He reached and gently pressed her fingers down to make the chord ring. The touch traveled up her arm, up her spine, to a place she didn't know music could reach. They kept the feeling a secret the way people keep candles under bowls, foolish and inevitable. The basement became their in-between. After rehearsals, Chica would check inventory and David would wrap cables, and the door would click shut behind them with a sound that gave their bodies permission to be honest. They talked first, as if the talking might save them. About school, about his dad who left and the way the house went quiet, about her fear of making mistakes on the ward, and her need to be perfect so she wouldn't be noticed for the wrong thing. He told her he wanted a studio one day where artists could record without being rushed. She told him she wanted a clinic rotation that made her feel useful again. He said the church felt smaller than God. She said yes. The first kiss was slow enough to stop if they wanted. They didn't. It surprised them with its calmness. No crashing waves, just a smooth tide of being exactly where they wanted to be. When they came up for air, both were smiling, like they'd been told a secret that fixed the world. We shouldn't, she murmured. We shouldn't, he agreed. And then they did again, longer. They were careful with each other. Their closeness was gentle, not frantic. They learned the rhythm of breaths and the weight of hands, the ways to stay respectful while still telling the truth with skin. They never disrobed completely in that basement. They didn't need to. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about finding a way to be whole for an hour. Still, the line between safety and sin blurred, and both of them felt it. She prayed afterwards, not because she regretted him, but because she didn't want God to feel far. He packed the drumsticks carefully, not because the sticks mattered, but because order was the only thing that calmed the noise inside him. Secrets make you good at choreography. They avoided arriving together, avoided lingering in the same aisle during fellowship. She laughed too loudly at someone else's joke. He offered to carry amps for anybody who asked, and still, the air between them changed room temperature when they stood within arm's length. Auntie Grace raised an eyebrow one day. You two are getting close, she said lightly, but her eyes were heavy. Chica swallowed. We just work well, she replied. David nodded like men nod when they want to end a conversation without lying. The discovery came not with fire, but with footsteps. The Saturday before carol service, the basement light was on, and so was everything inside Chica and David. They had finished run-through. Upstairs, voices swam. Pastor locking his office. Choir-led counting microphones. Children's workers herding laughter. Downstairs, the lamp made a small circle where they stood. Foreheads touching. Hands around waists. breathing each other in between soft kisses that reached for courage. A pair of heels clicked on the stairs. Not fast, not slow, subtle. Chica heard it first and pulled back, smoothing her blouse with shaking fingers. David stepped away, the space between them suddenly a wilderness. The door opened. Sister Ruth, the pastor's cousin, a woman with a memory for wrongs and a face that could harden a room, stood in the doorway. Her eyes scanned the circle of lamplight, then the shape of them in it. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "What are you doing here?" she asked, letting the question hold both levels of meaning. Chica's mouth opened, but words chose the dark behind her tongue. David shifted his weight and found anger first. "We're packing up," he said. He gestured to the folded cables, to the neat stacks. Evidence of usefulness, evidence of innocence. Ruth's eyes landed on their hands, still too close, and then on Chica's flushed face. The corner of her mouth tightened. "Upstairs," she said. "Now." In the pastor's office, the room shrunk. A small clock ticked like disapproval. On the desk, a leather Bible sat open, the verse lost in the weight of the moment. The pastor didn't yell either. He listened. He let silence do its old work. "We love you both," he said finally, voice heavy with the fatigue of shepherding. "But you know where you are. This is not the place for this behavior." Chica cried then, quietly, because being named behavior hurt more than being named sin. David put a hand on the arm of the chair and stopped himself from reaching for her. "We didn't do anything disrespectful," he managed. "We care about each other. We've tried to keep it decent." "Decent?" Sister Ruth repeated, like the word had betrayed her. "In the basement? After hours?" The pastor sighed. "We will not shame you in front of the congregation, but there must be boundaries. Chica, step down from choir for a season. David, no band for now. Meet with me weekly. We pray. We rebuild. Understand?" It was mercy in church language. It still felt like a public stripping, even if the room was small. By Sunday, whisper sprinted faster than truth. They were caught in the basement. These children of nowadays. Someone said, "I heard." Chica felt eyes like drafts on the back of her neck. During worship, she stood in the third row, her voice missing from the harmony that used to rest under the ceiling like birds. David stood 2 rows behind, hands clenched, the absence of the drum kit sounding louder than any beat he'd ever played. They didn't look at each other. Looking would say they were still a we. After service, a few aunties hugged Chica tighter than usual, the kind of squeeze that says love and warning at once. One whispered, "You are still a daughter." Another whispered, "Don't let the boy ruin your crown." Chika nodded and said thank you, and meant half of it. Outside, her breath fogged in the December air. She wanted to disappear, and also to be seen for who she really was. Not a scandal, not a headline, just a girl who had found tenderness and didn't want to misplace it. The church gave them structure. Weekday counseling with the pastor, separate. A promise to keep distance on Sundays. A recommendation, gentle but firm, that they pause everything else while they seek clarity. Clarity felt like a word people use when they mean separation. Still, they tried. For a month, they didn't text after midnight. They didn't linger in doorways. They didn't go downstairs together for any reason. He scrubbed practice rooms by himself. She polished the communion table with a care that felt like penance. The distance made the heat worse for a while. Denial is a kind of oxygen. It feeds longing. Yet slowly, another thing grew in the space. Honesty, the kind that doesn't ask to be cured. They met once in a cafe far from the church, where no one knew them. The plan was to plan. Instead, they sat with 2 mugs and a table between them, and finally talked about the thing under the thing. "Do you feel guilty?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "and no. I feel guilty for where, not for who." He nodded. "Me too. I feel angry at rules that call affection a danger. But I also know we broke trust. The keys, the room, the expectation that the basement is a safe space for everyone, not our space. I prayed about you," she said softly. "I didn't hear no. I didn't hear run. I heard be careful with each other. I don't know what to do with that when people are shouting other words." "We can be careful," he said, "but we can't be secret. Not here, not anymore." Careful meant deciding what kind of love they wanted to practice. Secrets had made them fast. Clarity made them slow. They gave themselves a rule. If they could be kind to each other in daylight, in full view of their imperfections and the world's, then maybe they were building something worthy of God and not just of heat. They asked the pastor for permission to court openly. He hesitated, the way leaders do when they are trying not to imagine headlines. On one condition, he said, no more basement, no more hidden places. Date like grown people. Respect the house. It sounded simple. It was not. Church people have long memories. A few congratulated them for their courage. Others offered advice disguised as affection. One woman suggested separate churches until marriage. "Start fresh," she said. "Erase the rumor." But rumor is ink. It doesn't erase. It fades slowly. They began to date in the city that had never promised to be kind. Walks along the Thames when the sun remembered London. Nando's in Stratford, where families made joyful noise and nobody cared about their hands on the table. Library corners where she studied drug dosages and he mapped signal chains. The quiet, compete softly snore of dedicated students all around them. He bought her a scarf that wasn't church-colored. She laughed. She bought him drumsticks with his initials carved. He smiled. They kept intimacy private and respectful, choosing spaces that belonged to them, not borrowed from a community. They learned everything again. How to talk about tired without biting. How to disagree without reaching for the exit. How to hold each other in ways that calmed the fear of being found. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes shame arrived without knocking. Sometimes Chica couldn't sing along to certain songs because a line hooked a memory. Sometimes David played too loud at a gig because anger still had a drum. The church watched. People adjusted. The carol service came again. New year, same songs. And the pastor, after clearing the plan with leadership and letting gossip run out of breath, nodded for David to return to the kit. When the first snare hit, under Joy to the World, a few people side-eyed. More people smiled. Chica stood in the third row again, chose a harmony, and let it carry her. She didn't lead that night. She didn't need to. The sound found her throat anyway. When rehearsal ended, Sister Ruth approached, and for the first time since that night in the doorway, she touched Chica's arm. "I am glad you're still here," she said. It wasn't an apology. It didn't have to be. It was a door that could open wider later. They never went back to the basement alone. They kept that promise like a vow. Some places are too holy to share with your weakness. Or maybe some rooms just hold your reflection too honestly, and you have to learn to love yourself in brighter light. Either way, they honored what had been asked and what they had learned. In time, church became, again, what it was meant to be. Not a courtroom, but a hospital. The aunties teased Chica about wedding colors without pushing. The uncles asked David about sound jobs and contacts without trying to be managers. The youth looked at them with an expression that meant, both we see you and we're watching if this is safe. He took that responsibility seriously. She did too. Love didn't make either of them perfect, but it made both of them faithful to each other, to the work of repair. When they argued, they didn't run to corners. They prayed short prayers that were mostly breath and tried again. When desire rose like weather, they didn't shame it. They took it to places where it could be honored. When their story pricked their pride, they chose to tell the truth. We messed up the where. We learned the how. We are still learning the who. If you were Chica, would you have stayed in that church after being discovered? If you were David, would you have fought for daylight love or fled the whispers? Tell me in the comments. And if this story met you somewhere real, like and subscribe. There are more London love stories coming about faith and heat, secrets and truth, and the ways we become gentler with each other when the lights finally come on.